My name is Emma Carter, and I am 30 years old, 32 weeks pregnant, and never in my worst nightmares did I imagine that my own sister would try to harm me on the very day meant to celebrate new life. That Saturday morning, the community hall in Columbus, Ohio, was filled with pink and white balloons, tables stacked with cupcakes, pastel-wrapped gifts, and the chatter of friends from work who had come to share my joy. My husband David stood proudly at my side, his hand on the small of my back, and for the first time in months, I felt seen. My parents, Robert and Linda, arrived carrying a set of knitted blankets, smiling stiffly, while Megan walked in late, as usual, her entrance designed to draw every eye. She carried a tray of drinks and made a show of pressing a glass of orange juice into my hand. She kissed my cheek and said loudly for everyone to hear that she wanted to take care of her little sister today. People clapped politely, but inside, I felt the familiar knot of unease. Megan had never cared for me. She thrived on taking the spotlight. I told myself to ignore the instinct, to let the day be happy. I took a sip and tried to enjoy the laughter as friends shouted guesses for the baby's name. Minutes later, the dizziness hit like a wave. My vision blurred. The laughter in the room echoed strangely as though I was underwater. My hands trembled and the glass nearly slipped from my grip. Rachel, my closest friend, leaned in with alarm. "Emma, you do not look right." I tried to answer, but the words stuck. The next moment, the floor rushed up at me. Gasps erupted. I heard David shout my name as he dropped beside me. My mother's voice floated above the chaos. "She is just tired. Pregnancy does that." My father's tone was harsher. "Emma always exaggerates. She cannot handle a little stress." Then Megan's voice cut through sharp and cold. Maybe she should not have tried to make this whole day about herself. The cruelty in her words stabbed deeper than the dizziness. I felt myself lifted onto a stretcher, voices swirling. The smell of frosting and flowers turned sour in my stomach. Sirens wailed outside as paramedics pushed through. The celebration dissolved into stunned silence. Red and blue lights flickered against the pastel balloons while guests whispered in disbelief. In the ambulance, I clutched David's hand and begged silently that our baby was still alive. At the hospital, Dr. Melissa Green quickly ordered tests. Her face grew tight as she spoke quietly to David. I heard fragments, traces of a substance. "This is not normal. We need to confirm." Terror clawed at my chest. Someone had put something in my drink, and I already knew who handed me that glass. I wanted to scream, but my body was heavy and my lips dry. My parents arrived soon after. My mother clutched my hand, but whispered, "Emma, do not make a scene. Families need to stick together." My father leaned close and hissed, "If you accuse Megan of anything, you will tear this family apart." Even lying in a hospital bed with monitors beeping beside me, they chose to protect her. In that moment, the truth I had always known but never dared to admit settled over me. I had never been their daughter to protect. I had always been the one expected to endure while Megan was shielded. Rachel refused to be silent. She cornered Dr. Green and demanded answers. When the doctor confirmed there were foreign chemicals in my blood, Rachel looked me straight in the eye. "This is criminal, Emma. The police need to know." For the first time, I felt a spark of strength pierce through the fog. If Megan had tried to poison me and risked my child's life, then this was not family drama. This was attempted harm. Lying there, I imagined the look on Megan's face when the truth came out. I imagined officers walking through the doors not to protect her as my parents always had, but to hold her accountable. My chest rose and fell under the oxygen mask, and my baby kicked faintly as if reminding me to fight. The party had ended in chaos, but the real story was only beginning. My sister had crossed a line that could never be crossed back, and soon the law would come knocking. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Columbus, Ohio, where on the surface, our family looked ordinary, but behind the closed doors of our modest two-story home, the truth was different. From the day Megan was born 3 years before me, it was clear she was the chosen one. Family photo albums tell the story better than any diary ever could. Page after page shows Megan in the center of the frame, her blonde curls tied with ribbons, while I stand slightly off to the side, clutching a toy half cropped out. My parents, Robert and Linda, never said directly that she was the favorite, but their actions screamed it. My father was a stern man who believed roles in a family were fixed and unchangeable. He told me over and over, "Emma, you must be the strong one. Your sister is delicate." My mother, Linda, reinforced the message in softer words, saying, "Megan needs more support. She is special," while reminding me that since I was responsible, I did not require the same attention. What that meant in practice was that when Megan threw tantrums at dinner, she was excused with a laugh while I was scolded for not finishing vegetables. When Megan broke my school project the night before it was due, my parents said she was curious and I should be more generous. When she borrowed my clothes without asking and returned them stained, I was told to share because family comes first. The pattern grew with us. In elementary school, I came home with straight-A report cards, but my parents barely looked at them before turning the spotlight to Megan's participation ribbons from gymnastics. At every recital, every party, every holiday, it was Megan in the spotlight and Emma in the shadows. By high school, the divide was a canyon. I worked hard, studied late at night, and even helped with chores, but my reward was indifference. Megan skipped classes, dated older boys, and spent weekends partying, but my parents defended her every time. "She is just finding herself," my mother would sigh. My father barked at me instead. "Emma, you are the eldest, you must set the example." Yet no matter how hard I tried to be good, the bar kept moving higher, and Megan kept being excused. I remember one summer I begged to attend a science camp that offered scholarships. I had earned a partial grant, but needed my parents to cover the rest. They refused, saying money was tight. Weeks later, Megan received a brand new car for her 16th birthday, complete with a bow on the hood and a party in our backyard. They drained what little savings they had to make. Her smile while I stood on the porch clutching the rejection letter from camp. These moments carved deep lessons into me. I learned not to expect fairness. I learned to stay quiet to keep peace. I learned that my worth in their eyes was measured only by how much I could sacrifice for Megan. I was the workhorse expected to carry burdens while she floated above responsibility. Looking back, I can see how deliberate it was, though. At the time, I thought maybe all families were like this. It was Rachel, my childhood friend, who pointed out once when we were 15 that my parents never praised me the way they praised Megan. She said, "Emma, they take you for granted." At the time, I shrugged it off, but her words stayed buried like a seed waiting for proof to grow. College years cemented the imbalance. My parents scraped together tuition for Megan to attend an expensive art school out of state, complete with dorm and allowance. For me, they offered nothing but advice to be self-sufficient. I enrolled at State University because it offered the largest aid package and I worked 2 jobs just to survive. I studied nursing while serving coffee in the mornings and waiting tables at night. Sometimes I barely slept 4 hours, yet when I called home exhausted, my parents said, "Megan is struggling with her classes. Can you send her some money from your paycheck?" I sent $20 here, $50 there because guilt had been drilled into me. Even then, Megan was failing courses while I was clinging to my GPA through sheer will. By the time I graduated, I had already accepted that if I wanted a future, I would have to build it myself without any expectation of parental support. But deep inside, a wound festered. I had been raised not as a daughter cherished for who I was, but as the safety net for their golden child. That wound would explain everything that happened at my baby shower years later when the roles we had been assigned since childhood reached their most dangerous conclusion. When I left for college, I carried not only a suitcase, but also the heavy knowledge that I was on my own. My parents had made it clear that while Megan deserved their sacrifices, I was expected to be self-sufficient. So I worked. At State University, I woke before dawn to open the campus coffee shop brewing pots of bitter coffee while other students still slept. Afternoons were for classes, and nights I waited tables at a noisy diner where grease clung to my clothes and my feet ached until I could barely stand. On weekends, I typed data for the business department, earning a few extra dollars to cover books. My days blurred into cycles of exhaustion. Some nights, I collapsed onto my textbooks before finishing assignments, waking with ink smudged across my cheek. My roommate Jessica often shook her head in disbelief and asked, "Do your parents really not help at all?" I repeated the same line drilled into me since childhood. They believe in self-sufficiency. But even to my ears, it sounded hollow. Megan's life could not have been more different. She attended an expensive private art college complete with a meal plan and a generous allowance from our parents. Her weekends were filled with sorority parties, trips to the coast, and new clothes purchased without a thought. When we met during holiday breaks, she told stories of nights in clubs and spring break in Florida, while I sat silently too tired to contribute. My mother beamed at Megan's tales of adventure. My father nodded with pride, and I felt invisible. Still, I endured because I had a plan. I wanted a career that could give me stability and perhaps one day a home of my own. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position as a nurse at a hospital in Columbus. The pay was modest but steady. David, who had been my classmate in anatomy, was already working at the same hospital. We began dating and slowly built a life together. My parents dismissed my job as ordinary, but I held on to it as proof of my independence. I rented a tiny studio with peeling paint and broken air conditioning. The window leaked in the winter, and in summer I stuck ice cubes in front of a fan to cool the room. Yet I saved. Every paycheck I tracked carefully in a notebook. No vacations, no new clothes unless absolutely necessary, no fancy dinners. When coworkers invited me to happy hour, I smiled and declined. They thought I was antisocial, but in truth, I was determined. I was building toward something bigger. It took 5 years, but eventually I had enough for a down payment. At 28, I signed the papers for a small one-bedroom condo in a modest neighborhood of Columbus. The kitchen was outdated, the carpet worn, and the bathroom looked like it had not been updated since the 1980s. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I felt pride that no one could diminish. I rolled up my sleeves and began to transform it. I watched tutorials on YouTube to learn how to tile a backsplash. I painted walls myself late into the night. I scavenged clearance sales for fixtures. Each improvement represented hours of labor, double shifts at the hospital, and small pleasures sacrificed. That apartment became not just property, but a physical testament to my determination. Meanwhile, Megan drifted from job to job. She worked briefly in retail, then in marketing, then claimed she wanted to be a photographer. Each role lasted no more than 6 months before she complained the environment was toxic or the boss did not appreciate her talents. My parents always nodded sympathetically and opened their wallets. They let her move back home repeatedly, gave her money for deposits, even bought her another car when hers was repossessed. I watched from a distance, knowing that if I stumbled even once, no safety net waited for me. When David and I married, it was a small ceremony in a garden behind our apartment building. We paid for it ourselves with money we had saved. My parents contributed nothing. Megan showed up late, made a scene about her dress, and left before the cake was cut. Yet as I stood holding David's hand, I felt a flicker of peace. I had created my own stability and chosen someone who loved me without conditions. Years later, when I discovered I was pregnant, the joy was overwhelming. After so many years of sacrifice and struggle, this child symbolized hope. I believed naively that maybe my family would finally rally around me. I should have remembered that patterns set in childhood do not vanish. Instead, they tighten until the breaking point. That breaking point came crashing down the day of my baby shower. Pregnancy should have been a time of joy, yet in my family it became another battlefield where the old pattern reappeared sharper than ever. When I told my parents I was expecting my first child, David and I were overjoyed, but their reaction was muted. My mother managed a small smile and said Megan will be so excited to be an aunt, while my father only grunted and asked if we were financially prepared. Weeks later, when Megan lost yet another job, my parents called me and said, "Emma, you should help your sister until she finds herself." It was not a suggestion, but a command spoken with the same tone they had used all my life. I was already working long shifts at the hospital while navigating morning sickness, yet they insisted I could send Megan some money because family supports family. I wanted to scream that support had always flowed in only one direction, but instead I bit my tongue. As my belly grew, so did Megan's resentment. She came to visit one evening and stood in the nursery David and I had painted pale yellow. She ran her fingers along the crib rail and said, "You really think this baby will fix your life?" The words chilled me. She laughed as if it were a joke, but her eyes stayed cold. Whenever extended family called to congratulate me, my mother redirected the conversation to Megan's struggles. Poor Megan, she just needs a little more help. At dinners, Megan would dominate the table with stories of her hardships while my parents nodded and sighed. When I mentioned the baby's kicks, they changed the subject. I realized quickly that nothing had changed since childhood. I was still the responsible one expected to sacrifice while Megan remained the golden child no matter how much she failed. David noticed the tension and urged me to set boundaries, but boundaries meant little to parents who believed I existed to absorb Megan's shortcomings. When I refused to give her money one month, my father scolded me. "You must be less selfish, Emma. She is your sister." My mother added, "You know she is not as strong as you." Every word dug deeper into old wounds. As the baby shower approached, Megan's jealousy grew more visible. Rachel heard her muttering at a family gathering that everyone would finally stop praising Emma once the baby ruined her body and her career. When Rachel confronted her, Megan smiled sweetly and said, "Just kidding," but the malice in her tone was undeniable. I began to dread the celebration that was supposed to be joyous. I sensed that Megan would not allow the spotlight to shine on me without some attempt to seize it. Still, I hoped against reason that the day might be different. I told myself maybe becoming an aunt would awaken her better side. David tried to reassure me that people would see through her, but years of conditioning had taught me otherwise. My parents always defended her no matter how obvious the wrongdoing. Deep inside, I feared that the pattern established long ago would repeat in its ugliest form. The weeks before the shower were filled with small signs. Megan called constantly to ask about the guest list and insisted she should handle the drinks. My mother supported the idea, saying, "Let Megan be involved. Emma, she wants to contribute." When I hesitated, my father snapped, "Do not be ungrateful." I finally relented, though unease gnawed at me. On the morning of the shower, Megan arrived late as usual, carrying a tray of glasses. She kissed my cheek and announced she wanted to take care of me. Her smile looked bright to everyone else, but to me, it was a mask I had seen for years. I did not know then how dangerous her envy had become. I only knew the pattern was alive and well. Megan would act however she pleased, my parents would defend her, and I would be expected to endure it quietly. The same script written in childhood was still being played, only this time the stakes were far higher. This time it was not my science project or my savings. This time, it was my baby's life. The morning of the baby shower dawned clear and bright with crisp air drifting through the curtains of our small condo. David helped load the car with trays of food and decorations Rachel had prepared while I adjusted the ribbon tied around my maternity dress. I told myself over and over that today would be joyful no matter what shadows lingered from the past. Friends from the hospital, neighbors, and a few cousins were coming. This was supposed to be my day. When we arrived at the community hall, the volunteers had already strung pastel streamers and set up tables covered with cupcakes. Laughter floated through the room as guests began arriving with packages wrapped in pink and yellow. For the first hour, my heart lifted. I opened gifts of baby clothes and diapers, listened to guesses about due dates, and let myself believe for a fleeting moment that I was surrounded by love and support. Then Megan arrived. As always, she made her entrance dramatic, pushing open the doors with a wide smile as if the entire event had been waiting for her. She wore a bright floral dress that clung tightly to her body and high heels that clicked loudly against the floor. In her hands, she carried a tray of glasses filled with orange juice and sparkling water. Behind her came my parents beaming as though she had just performed a miracle. "Look what Megan has done," my mother announced proudly. She wanted to provide drinks for everyone. Guests clapped politely. I forced a smile, though unease prickled down my spine. Megan placed one glass directly into my hands and said loud enough for the room to hear, "Let me take care of my little sister today." I hesitated. She had never taken care of me in her life. Still with everyone watching, I raised the glass and took a small sip. The juice was sweet, perhaps too sweet, but I told myself not to be paranoid. Rachel's eyes met mine across the table, and I saw the flicker of doubt mirrored there. She leaned toward me and whispered later, "Megan was whispering with your mother outside before she came in." I shrugged, trying to brush it off, but unease grew heavier. The games began. Guests tied ribbons around my belly, guessing the circumference, wrote notes of advice on pastel cards, and clapped when David answered trivia questions about pregnancy cravings. I laughed with them, but inside, I felt the tension building. Each time I glanced toward Megan, she was watching me, her smile tight, her eyes cold. When I shifted uncomfortably, she leaned in and asked loudly, "Are you sure you are up for all this? Emma, you look tired." My parents chuckled as if it were concern, but I heard the edge in her tone. As the afternoon wore on, I tried to push aside the discomfort. I told myself to enjoy the moment. I opened more gifts and held up tiny socks while everyone cheered. Yet the sip of juice weighed in my stomach strangely. My head began to pound. The room seemed brighter than before. When Rachel asked if I was okay, I waved her off. I did not want to create a scene. I stood to thank everyone for coming, but my knees wobbled. I gripped the table for balance, sweat breaking across my forehead. Megan stood nearby with a smirk barely hidden on her lips. The chatter dimmed as people noticed my struggle. David rushed forward, asking Emma what is wrong. I opened my mouth to answer, but words tangled in my throat. The music from the speakers warped and echoed. I heard my mother sigh. "She always makes such drama," my father muttered. "She cannot even get through one party without issues." And then Megan spoke clear and sharp, cutting through the noise. Maybe she should not have tried to make this whole day about herself. The cruelty of her words seared through me at the same instant the floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My vision blackened at the edges. Gasps erupted as I stumbled forward. David caught me just before I collapsed completely, but the glass slipped from my hands and shattered across the floor, spraying juice like a grim symbol. The baby shower that should have been a celebration of new beginnings had just turned into a nightmare. The moment I hit the floor, the cheerful noise of the baby shower dissolved into chaos. I heard David's panicked voice calling my name as he cradled my head, his hands trembling. My chest tightened and the room spun like a carousel gone wild. Guests gasped and scrambled back, the smell of cupcakes and frosting suddenly nauseating as the taste of that strange, sweet juice lingered on my tongue. Rachel knelt beside me, gripping my hand, her voice sharp and urgent. "Emma, stay with us. Breathe." I tried to answer, but only a faint rasp came out. My mother rushed forward, not with concern, but irritation, her words slicing the air. "She is just tired. Pregnancy makes women dramatic." My father echoed her coldly. "She exaggerates everything. This is no emergency." Those dismissals stung more than the dizziness as my world dimmed around the edges. And then Megan's voice slid in, dripping with poison disguised as mockery. "Maybe she cannot handle being the center of attention." Guests glanced at one another uneasily, but no one spoke against her. Suddenly, the door burst open and paramedics hurried inside, alerted by Rachel, who had already called 911. A scene we've got. The red and blue lights flashing outside the hall painted the pastel balloons with a grotesque glow. They lifted me onto a stretcher, strapping monitors to my chest as David climbed in beside me. Sirens wailed and the city blurred past through the ambulance windows. Fear surged like ice through my veins. I clutched David's hand, whispering a desperate plea. "Please, save our baby." The medic pressed an oxygen mask to my face and told me to stay calm, but his eyes betrayed concern. At the hospital, fluorescent lights glared overhead as Dr. Melissa Green rushed into the room. She was brisk, efficient, and serious. Nurses drew blood while another placed an IV into my arm. My body felt heavy, my head clouded, and yet every movement inside my womb reminded me of the tiny life depending on me. David stood nearby, answering the doctor's questions, his voice breaking as he described what happened at the shower. Dr. Green ordered toxicology tests immediately. She glanced at me with an expression that mixed worry and suspicion. "This is not typical pregnancy fainting," she said quietly. Hours blurred into each other. Machines beeped steadily. IV fluids dripped, and my mind fought through waves of fog. I opened my eyes to see my parents standing by the bed. My mother's voice was low but insistent. "Emma, you must not accuse Megan of anything. It will destroy the family." My father leaned closer, his words cold and final. "If you start spreading lies, you will regret it." Even in a hospital bed with wires attached to me, they cared more about protecting Megan than protecting me. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt raw. Rachel entered moments later and confronted them directly. "Enough," she said sharply. "Your daughter collapsed because something was in her drink, and Megan handed it to her." My parents' faces hardened. My mother shook her head and said, "Megan would never do such a thing." Emma is confused. Rachel looked at me and squeezed my hand. "You are not confused. We all saw her. Let the doctors confirm it." Later, Dr. Green returned holding the test results, her expression grave. "We found traces of a substance in your system," she explained. "It is not something that should be there. We need to notify the authorities." The room spun again, but this time it was not the dizziness of poison, but the shock of truth. My suspicions had been confirmed. Someone had deliberately tried to harm me and my unborn child. David's face tightened with fury. Rachel's eyes widened and my parents froze. My mother whispered frantically, "Do not involve the police. Think of the scandal." My father said, "If you go through with this, you are no longer our daughter." Megan lingered in the doorway, her smile faint but unmistakably smug. She thought she would escape just as she always had. But as I lay there with my baby's heartbeat echoing on the monitor beside me, I made a silent vow. This time I would not stay silent. This time I would not protect her. If Megan had crossed the line into trying to poison me, then the law would decide her fate, and I would not rest until she faced the consequences. The hours after Dr. Green revealed the toxicology results felt like stepping into a twisted play where my parents were both the directors and the actors. As soon as the doctor left the room, they leaned in close, their faces tight with urgency. My mother whispered, "Emma, you must not tell anyone else about this. Do you understand? It will ruin Megan's future." My father added sharply, "Think of the shame on this family. You will destroy us if you talk to the police." I stared at them incredulous. I was lying in a hospital bed with an IV pumping fluids into my veins, monitors beeping at my side, and still their priority was saving Megan's reputation. David stepped in between us, his voice steady but his anger palpable. "She almost lost her life and our baby, and you are worried about shame." My father glared at him with the same contempt he had always reserved for anyone who dared defend me. "This is a family matter. Outsiders should stay silent." David squared his shoulders. "I am not an outsider. I am her husband and the father of this child, and I will not stay silent." My mother clutched my hand as if to override him, her voice syrupy but threatening. "Emma, if you let this go, you will always have us. If you pursue this, you will have nothing." The manipulation was as familiar as my own reflection. Years of conditioning told me to swallow the pain to protect the family name. But Rachel was in the room too, and she was not raised under their rule. She leaned over and said firmly, "Emma, do not let them twist this. You could have died." She turned to my parents and added in a tone I had never heard from her before, "If you continue pressuring her, you are complicit." The word cut through the air like glass shattering. My mother's mouth fell open. My father flushed red with fury. Over the next days while I remained under observation, the gaslighting escalated. Megan never visited yet. She called my parents constantly. Each time after speaking with her, they would repeat the same refrains. "She did not mean harm Emma. Maybe you misinterpreted. You have always been sensitive. Pregnancy hormones make women exaggerate." I wanted to shout that the lab results proved otherwise, but they dismissed the science just as they had dismissed my feelings my whole life. The more they pressed, the more isolated I felt. At one point, my father even accused David. He said, "Maybe you are exaggerating this to make our daughter turn against her family." David nearly exploded, but Dr. Green entered and shut it down, reminding them of the seriousness of poisoning a pregnant woman. My parents left in a huff, muttering about disloyalty. For the first time, I saw clearly what Rachel had been telling me for years. My parents were not neutral bystanders. They were enablers protecting Megan at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing me. Late one night, as monitors beeped softly, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. David slept in a chair beside me, his hand still wrapped around mine. Rachel sat nearby, flipping through her notebook where she had written every word my parents had said, every detail of what happened at the shower. "Emma," she whispered, "I am not letting them bury this. We are going to fight." Her loyalty pierced through the fog of doubt my parents had tried to cloud me with. For once, I felt less alone. The isolation my family imposed no longer held me captive. Yes, they had trained me to doubt myself. Yes, they had spent decades telling me my role was to carry Megan's burdens. But lying there bruised by betrayal and with the faint kicks of my child reminding me of what was at stake, I realized something had shifted. I was not just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my baby and for the truth. My parents could whisper threats and Megan could smirk from the shadows, but I would no longer carry their secrets. The gaslighting that had defined my childhood would not define this moment. This time, I would resist. Once the initial storm of hospital drama passed, I realized that anger alone would not protect me. If Megan was going to face consequences, I needed more than suspicion and emotion. I needed evidence and allies who would not crumble under my parents' pressure. Rachel became my first line of defense. She had already written down everything she observed at the baby shower, including the moment Megan placed the glass in my hand and the cruel remark she made as I started to collapse. She promised to testify if necessary, and her determination steadied me. David reached out to his cousin Mark, who happened to be a police officer in Columbus. Mark could not officially intervene yet, but he explained what would be useful. Keep every medical document, record conversations if possible, identify other witnesses. His words gave me direction. Dr. Green provided certified copies of the toxicology report showing traces of sedatives in my system substances that were not prescribed and could have endangered both me and the baby. When she handed me the folder, she said firmly, "This is not just evidence, this is protection for you and your child." Rachel contacted several guests who had attended the shower. One by one, stories emerged. A neighbor recalled seeing Megan pouring drinks outside the kitchen door while glancing around nervously. Another guest overheard my mother whispering to Megan, "Just be careful. No one notices." Each detail painted a clearer picture. My parents were not just excusing her afterward, they might have been complicit before. The betrayal cut deeper, but it also fueled my resolve. Meanwhile, Megan's behavior grew bolder. She posted on social media vague messages about people trying to ruin her life with lies. She visited my parents and bragged about how family loyalty would keep her safe. Rachel overheard her once at the hospital corridor telling a cousin, "She is too weak to fight me, she always has been." Hearing that secondhand only solidified my decision. Weak was what they wanted me to be. Silent was what they needed me to be. But I was no longer willing. At home after my release, I set up a small box on the kitchen counter where David and I collected every piece of evidence. Medical reports, witness statements, printed screenshots of Megan's posts, and Rachel's notes all went inside. I carried the box like it contained oxygen. For the first time, I felt like I had a shield. David urged me to rest, but I spent hours reviewing the contents, shaping a narrative stronger than my parents' gaslighting. Each paper was a brick in the wall I was building against them. Rachel encouraged me to confide in extended family as well. At first, I hesitated knowing how skilled my parents were at twisting stories. But when I called Aunt Linda and explained everything, she listened in silence and then said, "Emma, I believe you." She had seen enough over the years to recognize the pattern. Her support opened the door for others. Slowly, cousins and even a few old neighbors began voicing memories of times Megan had lied or manipulated while my parents defended her. The truth was spreading beyond their control. Mark arranged a quiet meeting with a detective who specialized in domestic cases. I brought the evidence box to his office, my hands shaking. He examined the toxicology report, the witness notes, and nodded gravely. "This is serious," he said. "Poisoning a pregnant woman is attempted murder." His words hit me like thunder. What had felt like a family feud was in fact a crime. I left the station shaken but determined. Through all this, my parents doubled down. They left angry voicemails warning me to stop. They visited once, pounding on my door until David threatened to call security. My mother screamed, "You will regret betraying your family." My father bellowed, "You are dead to us if you continue this." I pressed my hand over my stomach and whispered to my baby, "They cannot erase us." The threats, once paralyzing, now felt like proof that I was on the right path. Gathering allies did more than strengthen the case. It healed parts of me I had not realized were broken. For years, I thought no one saw the truth, but now, with Rachel, David, Aunt Linda, and even law enforcement by my side, I finally believed I was not alone. And for the first time, I was not just surviving my family's abuse. I was preparing to fight back. The turning point came at a Sunday family gathering that my parents insisted I attend. They claimed it was meant to heal rifts, but I knew it was a performance designed to corner me into silence. David did not want me to go, but I told him I needed to face them. Rachel came too promising she would not let them bully me. When we arrived, the living room was already crowded with relatives lured by promises of reconciliation. Megan sat smugly on the couch between my parents like a queen flanked by loyal guards. She greeted me with a syrupy smile. "Emma, I hope you are feeling better." The hypocrisy nearly made me laugh. As the chatter subsided, my father stood and cleared his throat. "Family must stay united," he began. "There have been false accusations made that threaten to tear us apart." My mother chimed in. "These lies about Megan must end. She loves her sister and would never harm her." I felt every eye in the room shift toward me. The pressure was suffocating, but I had prepared for this moment. Slowly, I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder of evidence. "If you all want the truth," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest, "then here it is." I handed copies of the toxicology report to Aunt Linda and 2 cousins. The bold letters describing foreign substances in my bloodstream drew sharp gasps. Rachel spoke firmly. "This is not imagination. Doctors confirmed it." She read aloud her written account of the baby shower, including the moment Megan handed me the glass, and mocked me as I collapsed. Silence fell heavy. Megan's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. She waved her hand dismissively. Those tests could mean anything. Maybe Emma mixed medications. Maybe Rachel misunderstood. But then another guest from the shower cleared her throat. "I saw you pouring drinks alone, Megan. You looked nervous." Another cousin added, "I heard Aunt Carol tell you to be careful no one notices." The room erupted in whispers. My mother snapped, "That is enough. You are all twisting this." My father thundered, "Loyalty means silence." But the tide had shifted. I rose to my feet, my hands trembling but my voice strong. All my life I have been told to be silent, to sacrifice for Megan to carry the weight of her choices. But silence almost cost me my life and my baby's. I will not be silent anymore. The words echoed through the room like breaking chains. David stepped beside me, placing the folder of evidence on the coffee table for everyone to see. He said, "This is attempted murder. Protecting her is no longer an option." Megan's face twisted with rage. She stood and hissed, "You always wanted to ruin me, Emma. You could not stand that I was the favorite." My voice cracked with years of buried pain. "Favorite? Yes. At the expense of my freedom, my safety, my dignity. And now at the risk of my child. No more." I turned to the relatives. "You all deserve to know what has been happening for decades." I recounted the pattern of scapegoating, gaslighting, and favoritism. Each example landed heavier with the knowledge of what had nearly happened at the shower. By the end, several relatives were openly crying. Rachel then pulled out her phone and played a recording she had captured in the hospital hallway, where my parents warned me not to involve the police, or I would regret it. Gasps filled the room again. The evidence was undeniable. Megan's smug expression collapsed into fear. My parents sputtered, but their words were drowned out by the murmur of the family finally seeing through years of manipulation. Then came the final blow. Mark, the police officer cousin, stepped forward from the back of the room where he had been quietly listening. He held up his badge and said, "I have already been in contact with detectives. This will not be swept under the rug. Megan, you will answer for this." The room fell silent as the reality sank in. For the first time, Megan's power and my parents' control cracked visibly before everyone. The confrontation that was meant to silence me had instead exposed them publicly. And in that moment, I knew the war had turned. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The public confrontation at my parents' house shattered the illusion of family unity they had carefully maintained for decades. But the true reckoning came only days later when the police summoned Megan for questioning. That night before the meeting, Megan stormed into my apartment uninvited, her eyes wild with fury and desperation. David moved to block her, but she shoved past him, her voice shrill. "You think you can ruin me with your pathetic little folder of papers? You always were weak, Emma. You will crawl back just like before." I stood in the living room clutching my belly with one hand, fury igniting inside me. Not this time, not ever again. Megan paced like a predator, her heels clicking against the hardwood. "Our parents told me to fix this," she hissed. "They told me to make you stop before you destroy us all." Her words sent a chill through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Destroy us all," I asked. "You mean destroy the fantasy where you are perfect and I am the scapegoat." She sneered. "You owe me everything. Without me, you would be nothing. Do you think anyone would care about plain Emma if not for me?" Her contempt dripped with every word, the same poison she had been feeding me since childhood. David called Rachel, who hurried over, phone in hand, already recording. Megan noticed and lunged, but Rachel held firm. "Go ahead, Megan," she said coldly. "Show the world who you really are." Megan froze, realizing she was cornered. Her eyes darted between us, panic flickering beneath her rage. She tried to recover, muttering, "You will regret this. If the police come after me, I will tell them you set me up. I slipped something in your drink to save you from embarrassing yourself. That is all." The lie was as clumsy as it was cruel. I stepped forward, my voice shaking yet clear. "You drugged your pregnant sister and nearly killed her baby. There is no spinning that. For once, I wanted her to feel the weight of accountability." Megan's mask cracked. Her lip trembled, though she quickly twisted it into a snarl. "You always ruin everything. You ruined childhood birthdays. You ruined Mom and Dad's lives with your complaining, and now you are ruining me." I laughed bitterly, tears spilling down my cheeks. "I ruined birthdays, Megan. You ruined my chance to feel loved. You ruined my safety. You ruined my belief that family protects, and you nearly ruined my child's life before it even began." Rachel's phone captured every word. The showdown was not just emotional, it was evidence. When Megan realized it, she lunged again, trying to snatch the phone, but David restrained her, his voice sharp. "That is enough! Get out!" Megan thrashed before finally wrenching free, her face red with humiliation. She pointed at me, her finger trembling. "You will pay for this, Emma. I swear you will." Then she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Silence settled over the apartment. My hands were trembling, but inside I felt lighter. The moment had crystallized the truth. Megan had finally exposed herself without me needing to convince anyone. Rachel replayed the recording, and we listened to Megan's own words, dripping with guilt and resentment. David kissed my forehead and whispered, "This is it. She cannot escape now." The next morning, we brought the recording to Detective Harris, the officer assigned to the case. He listened intently, his face grim. "Between this, the toxicology report, and witness statements, we have more than enough to move forward." He promised charges would be filed within the week. Relief mingled with fear. Part of me still worried about retaliation from my parents, but another part felt vindicated. When I left the station, I looked up at the sky, the autumn leaves spinning in the wind. For years, I had dreamed of confronting Megan, of finally shattering her power. And now, the showdown had happened not in whispers, but in the open, documented, undeniable. I pressed a hand to my belly, feeling the soft flutter of life within. My baby would not grow up in the same silence that had trapped me. This was the beginning of breaking the cycle. Megan had always believed she would be untouchable, but now her own words had become shackles, and for the first time in my life, I believed justice was not just possible, it was inevitable. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a place where truth was supposed to outweigh power. On the morning of this hearing, I sat outside the courtroom, clutching the folder of evidence like it was a lifeline. David squeezed my shoulder gently, his presence steady and grounding, while Rachel sat on my other side, her notebook ready as always. My parents entered with Megan walking between them, her chin lifted as if she were striding into a family brunch rather than a court of law. My mother shot me a glare sharp enough to slice, while my father avoided my gaze altogether. Megan wore a navy suit too big for her frame, her face painted with an air of innocence that would have fooled me years ago, but not anymore. When the bailiff called us inside, the tension thickened. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, presided with calm authority. The prosecutor began by outlining the case, a deliberate act of poisoning confirmed by medical evidence corroborated by witnesses and reinforced by Megan's own words captured on recording. The words hung heavy in the air. Megan shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but forced a faint smile as if trying to charm the room. Then Dr. Green took the stand. She spoke firmly, her professional tone unwavering. She described my collapse, the toxicology results, and how the substance could have harmed both me and my unborn child. The prosecutor held up the report, the bold black letters undeniable. My parents squirmed in their seats, my mother whispering furiously to Megan's lawyer. Next, Rachel testified. She detailed the events of the baby shower, her voice clear and unwavering. She described Megan handing me the drink, the mocking comment as I fell, and my parents' attempts to dismiss it all as dramatics. She then produced her notes and the recording from the hospital hallway where my parents threatened me not to go to the police. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge's brow furrowed. Megan's attorney objected, but the judge allowed it, calling the words highly relevant. Finally, the prosecutor played the recording Rachel had taken in my apartment. Megan's own voice filled the courtroom, dripping with venom. "You owe me everything. You will regret this. You always ruin everything." The impact was immediate. My parents' faces drained of color. The relatives who had come to observe shifted uncomfortably. Megan's smug facade cracked completely. When it was my turn to testify, my heart pounded, but I rose with determination. I described the years of scapegoating, the gaslighting, the favoritism that had built a cage around me. I recounted the moment I collapsed at the shower, the fear that I would lose my baby, and the horror of hearing my own parents care more about silence than my life. I ended with a vow that my child would not grow up in that same silence. My voice trembled, but it carried through the courtroom. Megan's attorney tried to paint me as emotional, exaggerating, influenced by hormones. But the evidence spoke louder than any stereotype. The toxicology report, the witness accounts, the recordings, they were indisputable. When the prosecutor finished rebutting the defense, the courtroom felt suspended in breathless silence. The judge finally leaned forward. "Poisoning a pregnant woman is a crime of extraordinary seriousness," she said, her voice cold and measured. "The evidence against you, Megan, is overwhelming." She paused, letting the words settle. "This court finds you guilty of attempted murder." Gasps erupted. My mother clutched her chest, my father cursed under his breath, and Megan collapsed into her chair, her face pale as snow. The gavel struck, sealing the verdict. As officers moved to handcuff Megan, she twisted toward me, her eyes burning with hatred. "You think you have won Emma, but you destroyed this family." I met her gaze for the first time, without fear. "No, Megan," I said softly but firmly. "You destroyed it the moment you chose cruelty over love." The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Megan was led away. My parents refused to look at me, their expressions twisted in fury and disbelief. But for once their disapproval did not crush me. Instead, I felt a surge of strength, a release decades in the making. Justice had not erased the scars, but it had given me something my family had never allowed me before: validation that the abuse was real and that it had consequences. As we left the courthouse, David wrapped his arm around me, Rachel held my hand, and the autumn sun spilled across the steps like a blessing. For the first time, I breathed deeply, without the weight of silence on my chest. Justice had spoken, and the cycle was broken. The days following the trial felt surreal, as if the world had shifted on its axis. For so long I had lived under the shadow of Megan's manipulations and my parents' suffocating control that freedom felt foreign. The news of the conviction rippled through our extended family and the community. Neighbors who had once dismissed my pain now looked at me with new eyes. Some offered quiet words of apology for not seeing sooner what had been happening. Others avoided me perhaps because the truth forced them to confront their own complicity in staying silent. At home, David was more protective than ever. He made sure I rested, ate well, and focused on the baby. Rachel stayed close, too, checking in daily and reminding me that healing would not happen overnight. She was right. Some mornings I woke trembling from nightmares where Megan's face hovered above me with that smirk I had come to know so well. Other mornings I felt lighter, almost giddy, like I had finally pulled free from chains I had worn so long I barely noticed their weight until they were gone. My parents cut off all contact. They sent one last letter dripping with condemnation, calling me ungrateful and accusing me of destroying Megan's life. I read it once, then burned it in the fireplace. Watching the flames curl around the paper felt like a ritual of release. For decades, I had sought their approval, bent myself into shapes to earn scraps of affection. But standing there with the ashes floating upward, I knew I no longer needed their validation. Their loyalty had never been to me, it had always been to Megan and to the facade of a perfect family. The baby grew strong inside me, each kick a reminder of what I had fought for. When I went to my final checkups, Dr. Green smiled warmly and told me the baby was thriving. Her words felt like a balm. I thought of the night I collapsed, the icy fear that I might lose everything, and I whispered to my child, "We made it. You and me. We survived." When my son was born weeks later, I wept as I held him. His tiny fingers curled around mine, and in that moment I vowed that his life would be different. He would never have to question whether he was loved. He would never carry the weight of someone else's cruelty just to keep the peace. David kissed my forehead and said, "This is our fresh start." And it was. Rachel threw us a small celebration afterward, nothing like the grand baby shower that had ended in betrayal, but something far more precious. Close friends, supportive relatives, laughter, and safety. As I watched my son pass from gentle arms to gentle arms, I realized that family was not defined by blood, but by love, loyalty, and respect. Sometimes I thought about Megan sitting in prison. Part of me ached at the loss of the sister I had once wished to love me. Another part hardened with the memory of what she had done. Justice had placed her where she belonged, but I knew the emotional wounds she inflicted would take longer to heal. Still, I felt peace knowing she could no longer reach me or my child. The journey had cost me dearly, but it had also given me clarity. I saw now that survival was not just about enduring abuse, but about refusing to let it define the future. I had resisted the gaslighting gathered evidence, stood in court, and spoken my truth. For the first time, I felt whole. As I rocked my baby to sleep one quiet evening, the soft hum of the lullaby filling the room, I thought of the words Megan had spat at me in rage. "You always ruin everything." And I smiled through tears. No, Megan. This time I saved everything. I saved myself. I saved my child. And in doing so, I built a life worth living. The past would always be part of me, but it no longer dictated who I was. I was no longer the scapegoat, no longer the silent one, no longer the weak one. I was Emma Mother Survivor, and finally free.